Okay.
Excellent.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Clayton. I am the New York State Bar Association's Attorney Wellbeing Program Manager. And today we have one of our committee members, Diane O'Connell, here to speak to us about whether or not your law firm culture of well-being has Titanic syndrome. So with that, I will pass it off to you, Diane. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jennifer. And hello, everybody. Thanks for sharing your lunch with me. Like most well-being programs, this is going to be slightly different in that it's not going to talk to you about how you can manage your individual well-being, but it's going to talk to you about what is the well-being of the actual organization that you're working in, and does it have Titanic syndrome? And we'll get into what that means. I'm Diane O'Connell, and I'm a past chair of the international section of the New York State Bar Association. I am the treasurer, the co-chair of the DEI committee on the Wellbeing Committee, House of Delegates, a bunch of other stuff. And I have been speaking on well-being and diversity, equity, and inclusion for probably about 10 years through the international section. And I'm happy to share this perspective with you today. What brings me to this is just a quick bio, is that I was a lead risk management attorney at a large accounting firm, one of the big four, and ended up with an anxiety disorder and had to take medical leave, and started to dive more seriously into how do we manage our well-being? What does that mean? How do you get it? How do you manage it quicker than, putting it aside and saying, I'll just take vacation, everything will be fine. And it led me into actually leaving the practice of law and starting a company that works with law firms to do well-being audits. So with that, I will start. And if anybody has any questions whatsoever, you can put them in the chat. And as they pop up, we can address them as we're going along. We can have it as an open discussion, whatever works. Or if you just want to listen along and eat your lunch, that's fine too. I have your pictures over to the side here on a second monitor that I'm not really looking at. So if you raise your hand, I won't see it. So pop it in the chat. Okay. So what does it mean reinventing law firm's cultural well-being? Does your law firm have well-being program have Titanic syndrome? Let's first look at what I'm talking about with Titanic syndrome. It's a little bit more of a fun way to approach things, but it does sound like a disaster. So we'll get into it. So what I wanted to do is get a little bit of a background. And number one, why did the Titanic sink? Okay, and the Titanic sunk mostly because there were things that were overlooked and things that were not focused on, and it was only in the water for 5 days. So let's go back and let's look at the course of events that they ignored. So the contributing factors to the Titanic sinking was they ignored warning signs. They took a wrong turn to hit the iceberg. They were going too fast. They cut costs on things. They had no binoculars to be able to see far away, and they didn't have enough lifeboats. So let's get into the warnings. They received 6 warnings about icebergs, but they ignored them because the radio operator was too busy sending messages for the first class passengers. How does this impact, or how does it relate to law firms? Well, most law firms with more than 200 attorneys, they derive about 44% of their revenue from their largest 25 to 30 clients. This doesn't sound like a big deal, except for the fact that if you consider they have thousands of clients and they're relying on 25 to 30 clients for just all of their, for 44% of their revenue, then you're putting a lot of your eggs into one giant basket. The risks associated with that is if you lose other clients, you lose focus on operational issues that may arise, such as vendor relationships and employee satisfaction. So if you're actually operating your firm, or whether it's large or small, and you're focusing on just the top few clients, you could possibly be ignoring the needs of the mass amount of other clients, and some of those might actually become bigger clients. So focusing on just a small group of clients in your firm could actually increase risk for the firm itself. Another warning sign is attrition rates. And this is where we start getting a little bit more into the well-being. attrition and lost productivity actually cost law firms money. And so this is some of the measurements that I like to present to attorneys, because I think a lot of, well, not a lot, but there are some folks who feel that well-being programs and DEI programs are kind of nice to have soft topics, but they cost money. So when times get tough, they have a tendency to start squeezing the budgets on well-being and DEI. And if you look at the statistics, it's actually pretty blatantly clear that they're not soft topics, because if you improve the well-being of your law firm or the organization you work in, you can actually reduce attrition rates and save an awful lot of money. So if you look at some of these statistics, according to NALP's, I think it was the 2022 survey, attrition rates in law firms are up to 26%. So 26% of the associates leave every single year. The cost of replacing one associate averages about $350,000. So if you had a firm of 100 associates and your attrition rate was at 26%, it's costing the firm over $9 million in lost productivity and attrition, which is retraining and rehiring and recruiting, the lost productivity of the transition period and all that. So from a cost perspective, well-being actually can cost a lot of money. So what are the warning signs for the firms? It's attrition, it's absenteeism, the changing needs of employees, mental health, recovery time from mental health and from large stressful projects, wasted resources, lost productivity. What are the risks of it? The cost risks associated are increased insurance rates, higher malpractice suits, more fee disputes, which I actually mediate cases on for Part 137, the attorney-client fee dispute section of the New York State Court. And I would tell you that most of the fee disputes, if none of you have ever done any arbitrations or mediations, most of the fee disputes are based on, number one, attorneys being overly stressed and not paying attention to detail, and two, not communicating clear expectations with their clients about what the fees are. And it takes up, I mean, some of those mediations take, 6 to 8 hours of a day, which means you're not billing hours. So the fee disputes are actually a big cost factor. Client defection is another risk. So if you're not paying attention to certain clients, they may turn around and just say, I'll just go somewhere else. Loss in revenue really results from pretty much all the things above: reduced productivity, employee lawsuits, and continuity of services. And I think the biggest one of all, the biggest risk in not having a good well-being program is the loss of trust, the trust of your associates, of your staff, and of your clients. So the maiden voyage of the Titanic. The ship's trial run only happened 2 days after the last rivets were put into the ship and 8 days before it was set to sail. What a lot of people don't know is that from cost-cutting measures, they used bad rivets. I don't know anything about building ships, but I do know that the rivets were not the top rivets that they should have used. So when the ship actually did hit the iceberg, it broke apart much quicker because they kind of cut costs on building the ship. And they only did one trial run 2 days before, 2 days after the rivets were in, and then 8 days before the ship left. So we're talking about a 10-day span of the time that the last rivet was put into the ship until it was set to yeah, that's a tongue twister. Set to sail to New York. And they didn't, so they rushed everything so much that they didn't have any time for safety drills, lifeboat operation, passenger communication. How does this equate to law firms? Well, how often do law firms assess the resources allocated to the well-being of their employees? Is it decided just once a year when the budget's created, or is it assessed on a regular basis? So part of what I do with my business now is I work with law firms, and I go in and I look at 4 elements of the law firm. And one is employee satisfaction, One is the well-being programs that are being used and how they're being used. Another is the risk to the firm, which is the attrition rates, absenteeism, employee lawsuits. And then the fourth is the benefits package. And ultimately, what I found is that when you look at these four elements and you put them together to create a roadmap for what the well-being program and the workplace culture of the firm should be, you can set off with one plan, and within 6 months, sometimes, depending upon the change in the firm priorities, the change in the client demands, change in staff, what was put in place could actually 6 months later, some of it not be relevant. So if you're actually only looking at your resources once a year when the budget's due, you're looking at it like a budget line as opposed to a tool that can be used to actually comprehensively apply to the entire firm and maintain the status quo or maintain a balance so that the status quo of the firm can continue to adjust itself to the new demands. So, and then rinse and repeat, which is practice and stability. Billable demands for law firms, they may eliminate the opportunity for rehearsals. This is especially important for younger associates. There's been a whole bunch of different studies done where they take people, professionals who are new into the profession and seasoned professionals. And if you look at the way the information is processed by senior members of the organization much quicker because they've created memory muscles of all the steps that need to happen to get to the end point. So they don't have to actually think about, for instance, when you're learning how to swim, take a stroke, take a breath, take a stroke, take a breath, kick your feet, take a stroke, take a breath. That's what you think about when you're first learning how to swim. When you have become a seasoned swimmer, you're no longer thinking about that and you're just seeing the end goal. So in law firms, what the studies have found is that when you have associates who are doing billable hours, they feel like they don't have the time to actually rehearse and go through those initial steps of take a stroke, take a breath, take a stroke, take a breath, kick your feet. They're not thinking through that. They're trying to just get to the end line because they're trying to cut costs a little bit or cut practice a little bit because the practice portion is not a billable hour activity and they have billable hour demands. So that's one thing that actually I have found is pretty key is if there is a way for younger associates or newer associates to reduce the number of billable hours that are demanded of them and give them more rehearsal time, that they will actually learn the material much quicker and be able to increase their billable hours because they're now able to swim with the end line and goal. So here's another way in which firms can actually make adjustments to make their firms unsinkable. Alternative fee structures. So now, as of last year, probably about 6 months ago, 84% of firms actually offer alternative fee arrangements, which means they're not doing billable hours. And some of the reasons, what are some of the reasons that billable hours are harmful to the firm? Let's take a look. Let's start over here. Billable hours, number one, especially I've seen in the attorney-client fee dispute, mediations and arbitrations, is it billable hours have a tendency to create an air of distrust. If you give a client a fee for a service, which I know in many legal services is hard to do, but there are some services, like creating wills or, there's certain things that are kind of boilerplate that you can create flat fees for. When you create on a billable basis, I think a lot of clients, especially non-corporate clients, have a tendency to get sticker shock when they get the bill because they don't understand how many hours it actually takes to provide them the service that they're getting provided. So there's questions about when the attorney's on the clock, when they're not on the clock. It starts to get a little bit murky from the client's perspective. it doesn't also doesn't account for the value you provide to your client. So if you're providing a billable hour rate and you're not getting the results, or especially in litigation, it takes longer than a lot of people realize. They're not seeing the value for what they're paying you for because they haven't seen the results yet. So just a couple of different ideas on ways in which to approach things. The other thing is it can create anxiety and overwork associates because, as I said before, they haven't actually learned how to swim with the end goal in sight. They're still thinking about every stroke and every breath they're taking. So when they have these billable hour requirements, it has a tendency to increase anxiety levels and cause people to overwork because they went out to lunch with their friend and, oh, now I have to work till 10 o'clock. Oh, I went to my family's family reunion this weekend. Now I have to work extra hours during the week. And it starts to self-perpetuate itself into I have so much work to do. I'm so busy. I just have to work late tonight to catch up, which then manifests more mental health issues. So let's take a look at what a billable hour attorney's day looks like. So about 48% of attorneys' time is spent on administrative tasks. I've and heard law firms say that this number is much lower, that it's only their attorneys are billing about 46 hours a week and only spending about 10 hours on administrative tasks, which is absolutely impossible. Anybody who knows who's worked in a law firm, your administrative tasks take up more than 48%, take up more than 10 hours a week. So attorneys have to be working more hours that they're not actually accounting for. Um, and things that go into it are things like, collections, if your attorneys are doing that, licensing, CLE credits, office administration and business development. So in an 8-hour day, what this ends up being is about 2.5 billable hours. And that's after factoring in the realization and collection rates. The average attorney only collects about 1.6 hours of billable time per day. So there's 2.5 hours of billable hours in an 8-hour day. The reality is much lower. So let's talk about vacations. If you, I worked at a major international law firm before I went to work for the accounting firm, and we had a 2,200 billable hour per year requirement. And I did the math on it. And if you figure out that there's 104 days of weekends in a year, you get 10 days of holidays. And if you get 3 weeks vacation, that's 21 days of vacation. That leaves you with 230 days left in the year. So if you actually take your weekends, holidays, and vacation, you have no choice but to work 18 and a half hours a day for the rest of those 230 days to make up the difference. So offering vacations and weekends and holidays kind of seems like something nice, but I don't know how, if you have a 2,200 billable hour year, you take advantage of any of that. So it's a tough order. So some attorneys are going into flat fees. Um, what they've studies have found is that flat fees do promote efficiency. Attorneys are rewarded for embracing technology because the quicker you can get the work done, the easier, the less time you spend on it, and the more money the firm's going to make because you can do more work. It does reduce administrative work for the attorney. Um, it gives the attorneys a competitive advantage because they can bring in more clients and get more work done. And it establishes more attorney-client trust. And then there's the alternative fee structures. So for law firms that are using alternative fee structures, this is a list of the most common fee structures. 71% of them are using flat fee. And then, the list goes down. There's blended rate, there's a retainer rate, there's fixed fee, fee caps, stuff like that. So these are just some alternatives to think about. And so with the Titanic, the first mate had 16 years of experience and then an impressive track record, but he relied solely on what worked in the past and steered the ship in a way that put it in direct course with the iceberg. So, similar with law firms, I hear a lot of senior partners in law firms discussing how this is the way it's always been done. And my rebuttal to that is always, well, this is the way it's always been done, and it's been about over 100 years that this is the way it's been done. When 100 years ago we didn't have, if we think 1923, very few people had cars. Some people didn't have electricity. Telephones, not so much. Computers weren't even heard of. And usually, well, always in 1923, 100 years ago, it was men working in the offices who either had staff at home helping or they had wives at home taking care of children. Nowadays, you have both parents are professionals. You have computers, you have demands, you have social media takes up a lot of time. There's just a lot more demands on it. So trying to rely on running a firm using the same approach that has always worked in the past is really going to help you steer the firm into an iceberg, similar to the first mate of the Titanic. So failure to adapt is one of the things that has been identified as one of the key factors in why or any organization fails to succeed is they fail to adapt. And law firms are no different. When it comes to well-being, especially, there has to be adaptation because the demands and the requirements of today's attorneys are much different than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. You know, people have gone through a pandemic. There's Gen Z coming into the workplace that have completely different priorities than even Gen X or the millennials. So relying on past successes for the firm without assessing the current situation, it's going to lead to failure. Doing things the way you always have can create obstacles when facing the unknown. So, how do you change? One of the things I'll give you a couple, these are the things that you should never change. So, when you're adapting or you're changing a model or you're changing an approach or looking at your budget, the things you should never change are your integrity, empathy, curiosity, and willingness to adapt and learn. So, vision. With the Titanic, they had binoculars. I don't know how much the slide gets into this because I'm not reading it, but the Titanic was a brand new ship. They had binoculars. They had them in a cabinet, this beautiful cabinet with like leaded glass doors. And the second officer who was supposed to be on the Titanic at the last minute was replaced by somebody else. And he forgot to give the person who was replacing him the keys to the cabinet that held the binoculars. And because the staff, the second mate of the Titanic didn't feel empowered and wasn't getting guidance from the captain, and because it was a brand new ship, they didn't want to break the glass in the brand new cabinet and ruin the cabinet to take the binoculars out so that they can look for icebergs in the middle of the night. So as a result, like thousands of people died. So the other part of this is that they also didn't have enough lifeboats. They had enough lifeboats for only 1,200 people, and I think that there was like 2,700 people on the Titanic. I don't remember the exact number, but they only had lifeboats for less than half the people on the boat. So cost-cutting measures and not be feeling empowered to make decisions that make sense and could be life-saving is actually a major contributor to the Titanic sinking. So let's pull it into law firms. In law firms, if you have employees who are afraid to break the mold and speak up and do what they think is right, It's the same thing as having binoculars in a glass cabinet and being afraid of breaking the glass. If you don't have enough lifeboats for your people when they need the help, then you're leaving a lot of people behind. So being proactive is important, and you have to take action. You have to create an environment that allows the associates and the staff to also be able to take action and voice their opinions. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep the ship afloat. And resources, you have to procure the right resources. So if we look at this for well-being, a lot of folks, when they purchase well-being programs or initiatives, what they fail to understand is that if you have perks for your employees and your attorneys, like gym memberships, yoga classes, happy hours, things like that, those are perks. Those aren't really well-being programs. Those are things that they can use. And oftentimes I hear, especially with newer associates, more junior associates, that they have the gym membership, but they don't have the time to go to the gym. And the firm tells them that they should use the gym membership and they should go use the gym membership, or they should go to a yoga class or practice self-care. But then they have a senior partner above them who's saying, you have to work late tonight to get this done. And then they have to cancel their plans. So procuring the right resources is important, and the resources have to work with each other. So you really have to create a plan. You can't just procure individual perks. You have to say, okay, we have a gym membership. How are we going to get people to use it? How are we going to empower people to use it? Does the gym membership address people who have disabilities? Is it helpful for people who are in a wheelchair, who are blind, who can't hear? Like, is this the right resource for all of our employees? So you kind of have to look at the organization as a whole and see what perks work and how those perks work with the actual well-being program and the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Oop, I'm having finger issues. So ultimately, we know what happened. The Titanic was sailing on the water for 5 days. They ignored the warning signs. They didn't practice how to use lifeboats or what would happen in case of an emergency. They relied on past successes to steer their way in the current situation. And they didn't have a clear vision because they were afraid to break the cabinet to get the binoculars. So ultimately, we know what happened. They hit the iceberg. So, how does a firm avoid hitting the iceberg? How do you stay afloat? How do you make your firm watertight by creating a culture of well being and belonging? So, let's look at the what. This is where we start getting into the kind of the meat and potatoes of the well being portion. I like the analogy with the Titanic, but sometimes it's a little hard to follow. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. So what this diagram demonstrates is there's really four categories of approaches to situations, and you can either be in firefighting mode all the time, where you're succeeding today but jeopardizing tomorrow. Firefighting is really something that is immediate, it's critical, it has to be addressed right now, and it's novel. And those would be the categories that the only time you should be in firefighting mode is in the when those categories all exist. The other scenario, which is the thriving for tomorrow but failing for today, is blind idealism. So if you're failing today but you're looking to the future and you have these bright ideas, you have a disconnect from the present. You're kind of operating on wishful thinking. It's like being on the Titanic and looking at the cabinet, and you see the binoculars there and you're like, oh, when I have the key, I'll be able to open that cabinet and use the binoculars. Well, it's not going to help you right now if you're getting ready to hit an iceberg. So that's not a place that you want to be either. You don't want to be a visionary that's looking for the future and not able to manage what's happening today. So if your well-being program has these grand plans for the future, but it's not succeeding now, it's not going to do you any good. So if you're failing today and you're jeopardizing tomorrow, which is Titanic syndrome, this is where you absolutely do not want to be. This is where you're firefighting with blind idealism. And you're probably, because of arrogance, the too big to fail concept, overconfidence, you don't feel like you have to plan for the future. You don't feel like you have to look at what's going on today. You just think everything is just going to work itself out. And you have absolutely no vision. And this is the Titanic syndrome really embodies and describes that if you don't have your binoculars, you don't have sights for tomorrow, you don't have a safety plan, you don't have anything that's going to be put in place to avoid hitting the iceberg, then the firm is going to fail. Your business is going to fail. Your career is going to fail, whatever you want to apply it to. So if you want to be in the best position, then you want to be in the reinvention category. And the reinvention category is you're thriving today because you've made a plan and you have different programs that all work together and they're complementing each other. There's consistent communication from the top down to the bottom and the bottom back up to the top. When things are going right and things are going wrong, it creates an innovative thinking so that you can actually succeed tomorrow. So, and I think I can provide these slides, but feel free to screenshot this if you want. Because I think that a lot of people find this really super helpful. It just visualizes some of the spaces that you can be and that you don't want to be Titanic syndrome. You want to be reinvention. And if you get a combination of firefighting and blind idealism together on your way to reinvention, I think that's probably where most of us are. So how do you do it? How do you start? Well, when you're trying to reinvent anything, same thing as inventing. If you invent something, you're trying to do something for the first time. If you're reinventing it, you're taking something you already have and you're changing it in a way in which it still works in today's day, in today's technology. You know, uh, you're taking an 8-track and you're turning it into a cassette. You're taking a cassette and you're turning it into a CD. You're taking a CD and you're turning it into digital music. They're all still music, but they have reinvented, music has reinvented itself to adapt to the new technologies so that it can continue to survive. So starting really means being adaptable. You have to be intelligent and proactive about your approach. Um, you have to create and maintain a culture of well-being, and you have to seek to embrace change and pursue a purpose-driven objective. So if your objective in your well-being program is really just, okay, you know, we have a firm, well-being is important. We saw it during COVID. DEI is important. We know this. Our clients demand it. Let's just put a well-being program in place. And if that's the way you approach it, you're going to end up with Titanic syndrome on your well-being program. Your attrition rates are going to continue at the 26th percentile rate, and you're going to end up losing about $9 million a year if you have 100 associates. Nobody wants that. So how do you actually start with purpose-driven objectives? How do you start with changing the culture? One, you start with the purpose. And purpose is the core of a well-being program. The first step of purpose is to embrace the concepts. I'm going to read this off to you because it's probably just easier because there's a lot of words than you trying to read it and me talk over it. So the first step is to embrace the concept that it will be likely be messy at first. And anything like this is messy. When you're trying to reinvent it, you're trying to make any kind of change, you're going to hit resistance from some people who want the status quo and they want things to stay the same. And you're going to get other people excited and things aren't going to move fast enough for them. And so there's going to be tension There's going to be messiness. There's going to be some chaos to a certain degree. Which doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but the end result's worth it. Trust me. So it's similar to when you start creating a rubber band ball. If anybody's tried doing this, when you first start it, you have to kind of knot like one rubber band into like this little tiny ball like thing and then get another rubber band wrapped around. It's really hard to do when you first start it. And it's really awkward and it takes a long time. But once you start getting more rubber bands wrapped around it, then all of a sudden you're sitting, you get a rubber band and boom, you wrap it right around and you start the band starts to grow. Well-being programs are no different. In the beginning, they're going to feel a little bit messy. It's going to feel a little tense, awkward, not really sure how to go about doing it. Kind of like a first date, if any of us remember first dates. Um, but once you get to know what's at hand, then your rubber band ball grows, in your date, your relationship blossoms, in your law firm, your employee wellness improves. So to determine what the purpose of changing the culture, you have to determine what the purpose of changing the culture is. If your purpose is to increase profits, get happier people, more satisfied clients, or all of the above. If it's just for more profits, then probably your well-being program isn't going to do as well. If it's just for happier people, chances are your firm isn't going to do that well. So you have to get this balance of a combination between your people being happier and feeling safer and more satisfied, and you making more money as a result of it because they're being more productive and they're not leaving as much. So your attrition rates are reducing. You have to identify what the pain point is you're trying to overcome. So I've had a few clients reach out to me and say, what's your plan? Like, how do you do this? And of course, I give the answer that every attorney gives. It depends. Similar to providing a client to a service, you can't, when you're talking about the well-being of a firm, it isn't cookie cutter. You can't just say like, oh, go get the gym membership and let people wear jeans on Friday, casual Fridays. They can work from home 2 days a week, and that should do it. It's not that simple. It's similar to looking at the people in the organization, looking at your clients, looking at the culture that you want to embody and project to your clients, and figuring out what you want that to look like, and then customizing your plan to meet those needs so that you can meet your clients' needs better, you can meet your employees' needs better. You can start with trying to define a mission statement or a vision that emphasizes the firm's commitment, um, and align well-being initiatives with the purpose. So again, it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. You start with the border first, and then once you get the border done, you start putting all the purples together and the oranges together, and you start piecing it together. So that's purpose. Change. You have to be able to anticipate change. And if you can't anticipate change and you're blindsided by it, chances are you're starting to sink towards Titanic syndrome. So you can't get cocky or arrogant or complacent, even, too comfortable, because a law firm and being a lawyer is a business. And so you have to be able to anticipate changes that are going to come in the future based on trends around you, based on what you're being told. And sometimes you can push them off, but sometimes you can't. So in anticipating change, you have to identify the deficiencies of your current initiatives and approaches that expose you to risks such as lost productivity, higher insurance premiums, and talent attrition, and then be proactive in identifying and addressing these issues and understand how they may evolve before they become significant problems. You have to deliberately identify new and emerging trends in your firm, your clients' needs, and in the world around you. And you have to look at where you are now and where you'd like your firm to be in a year, a decade from now, 2 decades from now, and plan how you can make the changes necessary to make that a reality. And this can be accomplished by asking for client feedback, speaking to law schools, because law schools see trends with the law students who are going to be your new employees in a couple of years. Speaking to junior associates, find out what the goals and desires are of your client's industry. of the law students, of your new associates. Client, as attorneys, we have a tendency to go to CLE conferences and network as attorneys. One of the things that's really helpful that some folks don't think about is go to your clients' industry conferences. Find out what the industry is talking about with the new trends and how they're moving forward, and figure out ways to adapt legal services to address the changes that they're looking at. And reinvention mindset. So nobody wants their firm to sink. Nobody wants themselves to sink. Well-being really is the foundation of any solid structure for a professional or for their firm. So a reinvention mindset really is cultivating a consistent and collaborative reinvention mindset among the firm's leaderships and the employees. This creates resilience and highlights the importance of embracing changes for continuous evolution to overcome obstacles. So this goes back to the communication piece. Your employees, your attorneys, and I'm differentiating because we all know we have the IT department, the accounting department, the administrative assistants, HR. There's all of those people that are employees of the firm that aren't billable hour associates or partners. And so firms have a tendency to treat them a little bit differently, but they really are the backbone of the firm and they help keep things going. So firms really need to cultivate that consistent collaboration between the employees, the associates, and the partners and leadership. There has to be clear expectations and allow people to feel like they're working as a team. Because if they're not, then you get what I call disgruntled worker syndrome. And you have a bunch of people working there that feel like they don't fit in. And there's so many times that there's professional service firms, so law firms, accounting firms, investment banks, private equity. They have a tendency to focus on the money makers, the billable hour people, the professionals, the client facing people, and the trainings, the benefits, the slogans, the perks all seem to be centered around the client facing people. And then the administrative staff is kind of left behind because a lot of what's being offered doesn't apply to them in their roles and what they do for the firm. So the next one is encourage a culture of continuous improvement where new ideas and approaches, including objections, are welcomed and embraced. And again, this applies to employees, associates, senior partners, managing partners across the board. There should be feedback that goes upward and downward, respectfully, of course, but still. And everybody has to be open to feedback and willing to adapt and evolve well-being programs and benefits based on new information and insights. So this means that if you have senior partners who are, I know a lot of firms set up their firms in ways in which they have a senior partner who's overseeing HR, they're overseeing IT, they're overseeing DEI, well-being, which is good. But I would say that if you're an attorney, you may have an interest in this, but if you also have billable hour and client demands, and you have associates who report to you that are coming up to ask for support, that's a lot of hats to wear. It's a lot of things to shift back and forth. And it's not about time. It's more about what part of your brain you use for each. And you use one part of your brain to provide client service, then you do to manage your staff, then you do to tap into the empathy and demands that are required from DEI and well-being programs. So when you're doing that, you can actually start to shift into a little bit of a shutdown mode, that you're handling these things and you're handling them well, but you're a little overwhelmed and you don't want to hear any feedback from anybody. So, I mean, this is part of what this reinvention mindset is that not taking the burden on your, like, as a whole, or the person who is doing it isn't taking on the burden as a whole, that the entire firm actually collaborates together to ensure that the well-being of the firm works. So that does mean conversations up and down, constructive criticism up and down. So junior staff, administrative staff should be allowed to call a senior partner on bad behavior without fear of repercussion. It's a tough one, but it is necessary. So next steps, and I'll make this quick. Oh, next steps. This is stuck in here with a 30-minute call. This is a QR code that if you have any interest in discussing this further, I always put it in, because if you want to discuss it further, then hit the QR code and just set up time with me. And I had thought there was another code in there. If you go to my website and you have any interest at all, there's a what is your well-being at work? There's a little quiz that you can take, and it gives you like kind of gauges. It's kind of fun to do. So that's it. I mean, it's the concept behind it is, in order to prevent your firm from sinking, create a strong foundation with a strong well-being program that continues to reinvent itself, that you continue to analyze and look at, and make sure that it's evolving and changing with the evolving trends. Ask for help, because nobody can do it alone. Ask for collaboration, and everybody should just be open to communicate up and down the ladder in the firm. So with that, I don't know if anybody has any questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll give it a couple of seconds more. In fact, what I will do is I'm going to stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. People are questionless. Interesting. Let me give it 7 more seconds till we hit the 50-minute mark.
Diane, how do you get employers to buy into this when they are resistant? This is costing them money, this is costing them time. Okay, it'll look good to the clients that you're doing something about the well-being, but there's a lot of and I'm an old timer because I'm many years, 40 years an attorney, so many years. How do you get them to truly buy into this and not do lip service?
It's interesting. It's one of the biggest challenges, and it is one of the key factors that I focus on when I talk to potential clients. Is I start throwing numbers at them. Like, I throw the attrition rates at them. What I usually try to do is, ahead of time, I do a little bit of research on the firm. I find out how many attorneys there are. I go on, Glassdoor, and look at some of the reviews. And there's usually the pros are consistent and the cons are consistent. So you can get a lot of insight into what's going on at a firm just by the Glassdoor reviews of employees. And I put together a little bit of a proposal, and I say, listen, if you have, and I'm using this example because it's generic. If you have 100 associate firm where you have 100 associates, and according to NALP, the attrition rate is 26%. And on average, it costs $350,000 to replace each associate. And you're spending $9 million a year on just attrition alone. How could it hurt to spend $25, $50, $100,000 on getting the well-being program sorted out and getting the communication and feedback set up in a way in which there's consistency, and you're continuing to work on it? It's not even a 1% investment of the loss that you have just with your attrition rates. Like, what is it going to hurt? And if that doesn't work, then I move into, here's the reality. The client base is changing. clients, and I had this conversation. It's just the international section just had their meeting in Mexico City, and we did a panel, and somebody in the audience said, well, what do we do? You're talking about diversity and well-being. What do we do if our clients want top talent? And I said, well, what's your definition of top talent? And he said, well, Harvard and Yale. I said, that's not my definition of top talent. That's my definition of top Ivy League education. I said, are you going to tell me that Harvard and Yale students, even if you got people of all different colors, let's just pick on Harvard for a minute, because I think Harvard's resilient enough to get picked on. If Harvard, if you had 10 law school graduates from Harvard, and they were from 5 different ethnic backgrounds, and they were all different color people, male, female, different genders, or sexual orientation, religions, and you had this mosaic of diversity of Harvard graduates, and they came into your firm, are they really bringing that diverse of a perspective? Because they were all educated at Harvard. So top talent doesn't necessarily mean top schools. Top talent means that you have a group of people that have varying backgrounds, varying perspectives, and can actually provide top services to your client because they have innovative ways of thinking about things. They'll come up with solutions for things. If kids from Hofstra, I mean, I shouldn't call them kids, but students from Hofstra, New York Law School, Harvard, you get them together and get them to start thinking, they'll come up with way more than just a group of Harvard grads will. So, there's a bunch of different ways to go about doing it. And it's really, the return on investment, because there is a measurable return on investment. It's reducing attrition rates, improving client trust, and getting attorneys in that can actually provide the service the new generation of client wants and needs. And so the conversation can go on from there, but those are kind of the main points of it. What do you have to lose? You might not like it, you might not believe in it, you might not think it works, but are other things working? Give it a shot. Give it a try. Well-being is important. So that was a very long answer, but that's
Well, thank you. It seems to me in the practice that I work on, having either the venture capitalists I work in conflicts between people involving animals. So I do a lot of work in the veterinarian transition field after they've been bought by a corporate. And there is very little desire to think about well-being in that venue,
right. Yeah.
even though the attrition of veterinarians, which keeps the doors open, is huge. And so
Right.
you want to think that these people are smart. Maybe they're all from Harvard. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
However, they're pretty stupid when it
I
comes
feel
to
good picking on Harvard students.
I know, or Yale, or wherever.
But here's one other thing with that. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but the other element of that is, and I've had mid-size company clients of mine, because I did a lot of when I was at the accounting firm, I did risk management for their M&A practice. So I worked with all private equity firms, and private equity firms we all know what private equity firms are. But what happened was, when Europe started pushing ESG criteria, the private equity firms started to demand ESG reports. And lawyers and companies have been great at coming up with criteria for environmental, because you can easily measure how many parts per million of poisonous gas you're emitting. You can easily talk about social governance and what you've done with your board and background checks and things like that. And then you get into the social aspect of it. And what I see on people's companies' websites are, oh, we're not human trafficking, and we're making sure that we donate to mental health organizations. I'm like, wait a minute, what are you doing for your people? What about the people? That's what S is supposed to be about. So I've also found that, like in private equity, venture capital, like all that corporate stuff, when you start getting into the fact that it creates more tangible and measurable results to report for ESG purposes, people light up, they're like, oh, okay, that I can do. So that's another area in which um is kind of a helpful selling point to the resistant.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other, oh, there's some chats. I think it's mostly about codes. QR code. Okay, so that's all about QR codes. How about any other questions? We have 2 minutes. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Everybody's munching on their lunch. Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, thank you so much. This was so informative. I love analogies. So, I love the Titanic presentation. Like I said in the chat, I will get material out to everyone that registered. So I'll email that out. But I think that's it for our presentation today. So thank you again,
Okay.
Diane.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for the question, Deborah. And I hope everybody else enjoyed their lunch and got their CLE.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.